Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We have our Tuesday episode of Real Estate Tidbits. Make sure you stay hydrated today. We've got another killer weather day. I'm going to introduce my producer, Shannon Gonzalez, and she's going to ask me a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Marty, the suspense is killing us. From yesterday's social media question, what is the most unusual thing that has happened to you in real estate?
Okay, well, I've got two interesting things to talk about, which really don't have a lot to do with actually real estate, but they occurred during my real estate activities. So I will mention them, and they were all equally unique, and hopefully I won't have to repeat these activities. The first one was I was pretty new in real estate, and I was sitting in a closing with my favorite title company, and I was representing in this particular deal. I was both helping the sellers and the purchasers. So the sellers were sitting adjacent to me, and the purchasers were on the opposite side of the conference table. And we were going through and getting the paperwork signed and all. And then at some point, the title company person said to my sellers, so I just want to double check. You had requested that we're going to split the proceeds up in 2 checks to you. And the husband said, yes, that's correct. So then his wife, unbeknownst to me, was not aware of this. So she looked at her husband and said, what do you mean 2 checks? Why do we need 2 checks? The husband subsequently let her know in front of the purchasers, myself, and the title company representative that upon the closing, he was hitting the road and he will be asking for a divorce. They had children that were younger, and it just so happened in this particular situation, the wife was remarried, so she had a child from the first marriage and 2 children from the current marriage. And the way their relationship was, she had ended up taking on more of the debt than her husband had taken on. And the husband was making more income than the wife by a significant amount. So understandably, the wife lost it. So being inexperienced, but fortunately, I'm a pretty calm and collected person in stressful situations. I quickly said to both the title company and the purchasers, if you don't mind stepping out for a minute and let me have a little privacy and chat with my customers. So they did that. And it was a very tense situation. The wife was crying at the same time she was yelling. And anyway, to make a long story short, I finally convinced everyone that we would have to take a recess, and I would get back with everyone later in the day as to what was going to take place. I let the sellers know in no uncertain terms that the buyers had already loaded up their moving van and they were all set to move into this property. And they were first-time buyers, so it wasn't like this was a huge move for them, and it wasn't something that they could extricate easily from. So I told the sellers, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you if you guys don't go through with the transaction here, there's going to be a lot of litigation, and that's probably going to be not all of your problems. You really need to go forward with this and handle your personal situation separately. Now is not the time and place. Unfortunately, the way this has come down, I understand the tenseness of the situation. So anyway, everybody left at this point except I stayed chatting with the wife. And I had a lengthy chat with her, and I said, why don't you sleep on it? And I kind of reiterated all these different things that I had mentioned about the problems that it would cause. And fortunately, somewhat cooler heads prevailed after a good night's sleep, and I was able to finish the closing up the following day. So I actually had the title company come in on a Saturday morning to close this for me, because this happened late Friday afternoon, which is not the best time for unexpected things in a real estate closing anyway. But that was a very hairy experience, to say the least, and I hope I never encounter another one like that. The other one was a completely different situation, but equally confounding. I had a listing that I was marketing, and it was in a popular community in Southwest Orlando, and my sellers had recently had an infant. So their infant was, from my memory, and this happened a while ago as well, the infant was about 4 or 5 months old. And they had all the different monitors that you could have in those days. This was about 15 or 20 years ago. So the technology wasn't quite as advanced, but they still had a lot of monitors there. And so the wife was a caretaker, so she was not working. So the way we had arranged showings on that property was I would coordinate with the wife, and then she would leave right before the potential purchaser arrived. And she would go to a neighbor's house on the street, and then I would let her know when the showing was over, and then she would come back with her infant. So we had done that successfully. The house was a newer listing. It had been on the market a few weeks, and we were getting pretty solid activity. So I had a showing scheduled for an afternoon, and it was a broker that I knew but not well. And anyway, so he went ahead and showed the house and let me know that he was finished with the showing. And I notified the wife, and she came back with her infant. So I got a call from her a few hours later, and she was semi-hysterical. And I calmed her down, and I asked her what was going on. Well, she said a couple of things. She said, number one, that she found a cell phone by her bed in the primary bedroom. Number two, she could tell her bed sheets and blanket had been disturbed. And number three, when she replayed the monitor and such, she was able to tell that there was illicit activity that had transpired during the showing. And you can imagine what I mean by illicit activity, with the cell phone being left there and the beddings being ruffled. So she told me this, and she was, besides being, emotional about it, she was livid about this. So I asked her, I said, would you like me to report this activity to the Board of Realtors? I've never encountered this before, so I don't know what type of procedure they'll take, but obviously this is extremely unprofessional and should never have occurred, and I apologize, but there's not much I can do about it. Would you like me to call the other agent and kind of chat a little bit and see what he's willing to chat about, and let him know that we have a cell phone too? She said, no. For right now, let's not do anything. Let's hold on to his cell phone, not let him know that he left it here, and we'll see if he has the nerve to ask for it. So anyway, to make a long story short, he never called back for the cell phone. I never heard from him at all. He never showed that property again. And fortunately, we were able to sell the house pretty quickly, and the closing went smoothly. But that is one situation that you just scratch your head about, not even a moral issue, but you would think somebody in the real estate business, and this was a real estate broker who actually owned the firm, you would think they would have enough common sense and professionalism to conduct that type of activity in the privacy of their own surroundings, not in the customer's surroundings. And anyway, to make a long story short, as one additional tease to this particular seller knew a lot of people in Hunters Creek and wanted to ask around. And anyway, to make a long story short, she found out that the realtor's partner in this lived in Hunters Creek, and the realtor's partner was married as well as the realtor. And evidently, from what she found out, this was an ongoing activity. But anyway, it just shows that anything can happen in the real estate business. And, one thing that I've learned over the years, usually the situations are not quite that, you could say, not funny, but unusual. But you do have unexpected situations, so you have to think on your feet, and you have to try to maintain your cool. Because as I've always said, everything at some point happens at least once to you in real estate. And I've had a lot of interesting stories that have occurred, but those are probably the most unique ones, I would say. Well, I'm going to pivot from that a little bit, and I'm going to pitch back to what's going on in society a little bit. We had kind of the fun part, and now we're going to have the really serious part. In the news the last few days, you've probably heard about, we've had 3 or 4 mass tragedies, somewhat terroristic activities. We had a mass shooting in New York City last night where a policeman was murdered, and there were several innocent bystanders that were murdered. This happened in an upscale office building in a prime area in Manhattan. We had a family that was camping out in Arkansas. There was a family of 4, a husband and wife and 2 children. They were there for a family outing. And I don't know the particulars, but a male approached them, attacked them, stabbed and killed the husband and wife, and the children fortunately escaped. I don't know any more particulars about that. And then there was a couple other tragedies also where multiple people were injured or killed. And this has all happened over the last 3 or 4 days. And it's been in all different states in the United States. And I know this is a real estate podcast, and I apologize, but when these things happen in such regularity, and they've been going on in our country for years now, they just seem to have gotten worse. With all the animosity in the country, all the political fervor, all the mental illness, all the ease in purchasing guns, it's just a never-ending thing. I mean, the United States is the murder capital of the world. And, we're proud to be residents and citizens here. We think we have the greatest standard of living in the world. And probably from a monetary standpoint, we do. But we certainly don't have the most civilized country right now. This is just an ongoing problem that seems to get worse every year. And our elected officials just turn a blind eye to it. What do you hear whenever you see the news and they interview the victims of this stuff? They say our hearts and prayers are with the family and friends. And then everybody forgets about it and moves on to the next tragedy, and nothing ever gets done. Regardless of what your political views are, regardless of what you think with which party has better solutions, in my opinion, neither of them have any kind of solutions that they've been able to implement. It's obvious that we have no control over weapons in this country. They're easy to acquire, and they're used all the time in these tragedies. and nobody seems to want to admit that we need to have some kind of policy, at least so we can track these things better, so we can make it a little harder to acquire things. Everybody falls back on the old adage, well, the Second Amendment, everybody has the right to bear arms. And that's certainly true, but there's a couple things that need to be cited. The Second Amendment was passed a couple hundred years ago when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution. And the main reason it was done was if the British reinvaded the United States, they wanted to be able to arm the citizens and the militias quickly. So that was why they had that Second Amendment policy. Also, they didn't have automatic weapons, obviously 250 years ago. You had to use muskets or whatever kind of techniques you had for loading your weapon each time you shot it off. And it was just a whole different environment. And unfortunately, everybody falls back. Well, we've had this for 250 years. That's what our founding fathers wanted. But our society is nowhere near what it was. You need to adjust. I mean, they're talking about making, for example, whether it's in jest or seriousness, changes to the Constitution so that our president could hold a third term, for example. But weapons are a problem, and murders are a big problem. And everybody falls back on mental illness. Well, yeah, if you kill somebody for no reason, you're mentally sick. But we don't have an effective way to identify people with mental problems, and that hasn't gotten any better. And it's probably not going to get better because some of these people that commit these murders don't necessarily have outward signs of this. I know a few years back, and it's been on the news recently, the person in Idaho that murdered those 4 college students, he took a life sentence instead of actually going through the official trial and the sentencing. But he still hasn't said, why he, brutally murdered these people. There's been a lot of speculation on it, and again, this person had advanced education. I believe he's a PhD. So he certainly wasn't the generalized prototype of what you would consider to be a murderer. But at the end of the day, we need to admit a couple of truths. That we've had a big murder problem for years that gets worse. Our political officials, A, don't have solutions to it, and B, they don't have the integrity and guts to do something about it, even if a portion of their constituents don't agree with it. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are supposed to be what our country was founded on, and you can't really live your life relaxed any longer. You've got to be so cognizant of your surroundings. You've got to decide what activities you're going to do and what activities you're not going to do because they're not as safe as they used to be. It's really terrible. Our kids have to go through terrorist drills in schools because of all these mass shootings we've had. The list just goes on. And I know I'm deviating way out of real estate, and obviously my focus is selling real estate, taking care of my family, and trying to maintain my mental sanity. But I think it's things that people need to really think about. And you need to elect officials that are going to have the guts and integrity to do something about it. And right now, our political system is failing us on all fronts. We need a whole new system. Just like with all these budget issues that have come up, you hear a lot of verbiage about it. The theme for making all these budget changes is that we have way too much waste in government. And yeah, we probably do have some waste in government. But what's our solution? Besides, according to all experts, these changes that just took place are going to raise our budget by hundreds of billions of dollars. Basically, what ended up happening was assistance for a lot of the people that are at the lower rung of the economic echelon got chopped. So the people that need help the most are going to be losing the most. And the people that are going to be benefiting from a lot of these changes are the wealthiest 1% of the country, because taxes for the well-to-do people have been, reduced. And I'm not a blazing liberal by any means. I'm an independent. I'm a moderate. But we have too much of a separation of classes. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And it just goes along with all these other themes I've cited, in the sense that politicians don't have the integrity, the intelligence, and the common sense to say that this is not healthy for our country. And it just leads and breeds itself to more suffering and more violence. That's all for today. Please give some thought about these things. Stay warm, stay hydrated. We will be back with Friday's Real Estate Tidbits podcast, and this is Marty Kaiser out.